In continuing in Klal Kuf Lamed, chapter 130, in the laws of Pesach and the Chayei Adam, we're going to go through the rules of the Seder, the customs of the Seder, in brevity. So there are 16 rules that the author brings down, Rav Danzig brings down over here, for rules of the Seder, going through the actual order of it itself, through the popular song of Kadesh Urchatz. So we'll make note of each of those as we go through it. So the rules of the Seder, according to the author of the Chayei Adam, in brief. One should prepare their seat while it's still daytime as best they can to make it as nice as possible. And all the cups should be washed out and rinsed out before the Seder starts. And as we've mentioned before, these are the same ways that one would prepare a cup for Birkas HaMazon, for benching, which means that the cup has to be solid, no dings or missing parts in it. It needs to hold at least a revius, about 5 or 6 ounces. And because you're going to have to drink rov revius, the majority of the cup, in order to fulfill your obligation for arba kosos. So it needs to be nice like that. So you want to make sure you rinse it out on the inside a few times and then on the outside. And the reason why you do this is so that the moment that you return from shul, you can start the Seder immediately. And it avoids letting the children fall asleep, because you want the children awake so that they can ask the Manish Tanah, or recite the Manish Tanah. And also the Seder plate, the Ka'ara, should also be set up while it's still daytime. And the way it should be set up is the following. You should put out your 3 matzahs, and you should cover them. And it should be a very nice covering like you would have for every other Shabbos and Yom Tov. Note that I'm making personally is that often there are coverings that have 3 separate insertions for them. Those are also really nice to get, and they're very unique to Pesach. And so he says, however, the people who like to wrap the matzahs and to place large breaks in between every single matzah, he says this is a silly custom. And on top of those, or above those, to the right, should be what's known as the zeroa, the shank bone. And to the left of it, opposite it, is the egg, as these are reminders of the offerings that were once brought in the temple. And the maror should be right in the middle to reach it. Charosa should be placed below the shank bone. And then below that, you put the karpas below the egg. And then leave a little more maror that you're going to use for the hillel sandwich between them. This order isn't a big deal, but we leave it like this so that way you can access the mitzvah in its proper order and not pass over one mitzvah. We also have salt water on the table, and you should make the salt water during the day. If you forgot to make it, you should put water first and then add salt. Mishabur makes a couple comments on this. And he says you can make salt water on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And he also points out that you shouldn't make very much, because you don't want to make it look like you're storing a whole bunch of it or using it for pickling. That was the first halacha. The second halacha. He says, immediately when you return home from shul, one would wear the kittel. The kittel is a white garment that's a very specific look to it. And if a person is in mourning, they don't wear that. However, if they were in mourning and they wear it, it's not a big deal. After you have that set up, you should prepare the cups. And if you have somebody who's there to serve, have the person who serves do it for everyone. So that way people feel as if they are truly free because they have somebody working for them. And now we'll go through the different parts of the Seder according to the way the Haggadah has the little poem written out. Start with Kadesh. Kadesh is reciting the Kiddush on the holiday, reciting blessings, acknowledging the holiness of the day. Before we do that, the author says, one should make sure that everyone in their house, boys, girls, men, women, that they should make sure that they drink from the cup, and you should inform them and warn them about this. They should drink most of the cup, okay? And drink it all in one drink and not take a break in between each of them. Okay? And some people get mad at the servants if they drink too much, but that's not appropriate to do, because you are preventing them from enjoying the mitzvah and enjoying the holiday. So let them drink. If you take a break while drinking, and that break is longer than the amount of time it would normally take you to drink the whole cup, especially when it comes to the first two cups that you're having in the Seder, you should drink them again because you haven't had the requisite amount. The Mishmur says, however, our custom is not to drink anything between the different cups that are required for the Seder. And if you're going to make another bracha, if you're going to drink another cup, you need to make another bracha. So therefore, you should not go ahead and drink another cup to replace the first cup, unless you had in mind to drink more between the first cup and the second cup. And so, as we mentioned before, in another shir, we had said that you should actually just have in mind that if someone messes up with drinking, for example, they don't lean to the left, or in this case, where they don't drink enough, they should have in mind that I'm going to drink another cup in case I don't do this drink correctly. And with the last two cups, this rule won't work at all. Now, if you wait in between each drink even longer, the amount of time it would take a person to eat a piece of bread, which is like 5 minutes to 9 minutes. So everyone agrees in that case that you need to drink another cup, as according to the Chayei. The Mishnah Berurah says you also have to make another bracha. You must not start Kiddush before it is dark. We consider it dark when 3 small stars have come out. That's called Tseis HaKochavim. And then you should do the Kiddush as is written in the Haggadah. If the first Seder night falls out on Shabbos, you would start Kiddush with Vayichulu. If the Kiddush falls out, if the first Seder falls out on Motzei Shabbos, after the Sabbath has concluded, the Kiddush follows the following structure. Yak Nahaz, that is a mnemonic device, Yud Kuf Nun He Zayin, which stands for Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. You see the blessing on the wine, the blessing to sanctify the day, the blessing on the Havdalah candle, the blessing that is acknowledging there's a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov, and then the final part of the Kiddush is the Shehechianu blessing. If you forgot to recite Havdalah, and you already started, if you forgot to say Havdalah and already started the Haggadah, you should finish the Haggadah first. Okay, and the reason why is since Havdalah requires its own special cup, it looks like you're going to be adding another cup. So therefore, you should read the Haggadah until you get to Ga'al Yisrael, which is the very end of Hallel, after the 4th cup. And after that, you can go ahead and recite the Havdalah. The Mishnah Berurah says that our custom of where we say a blessing at every single cup, it's entirely possible that if you recall that you've missed Havdalah before you've started the Haggadah, you still need to wait until you finish it, unless you had in mind that you were going to drink another cup in between. So if you did, you could say Havdalah in between. But this assumes that the way we described it is that you're not going to drink more. If you remember while you're in the middle of the meal that you haven't done Havdalah, then you can make the Havdalah in the middle of the meal because you can drink as much as you want. And you can even say Borei Pri Hagafen on it. Unless you had in mind that you were going to drink wine in the middle of the Suda, then you could just recite the Havdalah prayer over that cup of wine and the candle. If you forgot until after you recited Birkas HaMazon, the grace after meals, you should say Hallel and then Havdalah on the fourth cup, because you really have no other options after that, because you're not allowed to drink after the fourth cup, right? So you say, well, now what? So Mishnah Berurah points out, now if you remember, after the fourth cup, you can have a fifth cup and say Borei Pri Hagafen. That's his solution. Back to Kiddush, there's no requirement to wash your hands before Kiddush, as long as your hands are clean. But if you're trying to get your hands clean, you can wash them a little bit. Also, before you recite the Kiddush, you should have in mind that you want to fulfill the mitzvah of sanctifying the day, and that you also have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah, even though it's a rabbinic mitzvah, of drinking 4 cups of wine. But we should also point out that the cup that's used for Kiddush is one of the 4 of them, and so therefore you're trying to say that this mitzvah is part of a bigger mitzvah of the evening. Some have the custom to say, behold, I prepare myself to sanctify and to fulfill the mitzvah of the Abrakosos, this is a statement that you make, which is often printed in some versions of the Haggadah. So one thing is that you shouldn't say this after Kiddush, because you're going to say the blessing of Borei Pri Hagafen, or you should say it before you've started Kiddush. And before the Haggadah, you should have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah of reciting the Exodus from Egypt, or to retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Speaking of that, we just did Kadesh. Now the fourth halacha here, we're talking about Urchatz, which is the second thing in the Seder. After Kiddush, wash your hands. Why? Because there is an actual rule that everything that is dipped into a liquid requires hand washing, netilas yadayim. Even though in our day we aren't so worried about this, because it was only enacted for rules relating to spiritual impurity, which we're not so careful about these days. And it's really only strictly followed by those who engage in regular strictures like this as well. Nonetheless, on the night of Pesach, everyone is strict with this, and they wash their hands. And this washing is done without reciting a blessing. And we're trying to also show little children that there's something different about tonight, so they ask a question. Speaking of asking, what are they going to do next? They're going to ask about this. Halacha Hey, talking about karpas. So you've washed your hands, and he says to take a piece of parsley or some other vegetable and dip it into salt water. And you should make the bracha, Borei Pri Ha'adama. Okay. Now, if you were actually growing it in a utensil in the house, such as you were growing onions in a utensil in the house that wasn't actually in the ground, the blessing will then be shehakol. Mishnah Berurah makes a couple of interesting comments over here. Mishnah Berurah says that it doesn't have to be in salt water. Salt water is the custom the Chayei mentions, but really the truth is that there's lots of options. People use vinegar, some people use a sharp wine, and then the third option is also the salt water. Another important thing is when you say this Borei Pri Ha'adama, the Mishnah Berurah says that you should have in mind to use it for eating the maror later on, because some people consider eating the maror as not being part of the actual meal, and it's not considered secondary to the bread, which also means that you can't really wait for a long period of time to get to it. You should get to eating maror within an hour, or eat more pieces of it. But he also brings down the Mishnah Berurah that you should eat less than a kazayas at this time, so you're not obligated in a bracha achrona at this time. So therefore, my other suggestion wouldn't work. So basically what they're arguing is get to the more part of the Seder within an hour in order for this to help. Okay, now, and again, this statement of growing it in a utensil is something that the Chayei is following his own opinion. However, the Mishnah Berurah does not agree with this opinion, but we're not going to discuss Hilchos Brachos right now. Halacha 6, Yachatz. So now that you've done karpas, you've eaten it, you take the middle matzah and you break into two pieces. One part larger and one part smaller. The larger part you should put away in another container and save it for afikomen. And it's important that you should wrap the afikomen and make sure that it's wrapped in a towel that hasn't been washed in a type of detergent that contains wheat starches. And the smaller piece, you should go ahead and return it to your plate in front of you, and it should be covered while we are reciting the Haggadah. However, when we get to the phrase of V'hi sha'am d'lavosenu, when we get to the statement of the one who stood in guard of our ancestors, we're going to actually hold the cup for that one, and when we're holding the cup, you should then cover the matzah. When that's completed, you will then uncover the matzah. You'll then uncover the matzah until you get to the paragraph that starts with Lafichach. And then again, you're going to cover up the matzah and raise the cup. Okay, so there's two paragraphs where for each one you're going to do that. One little note over here. He says, at this point, many people have the custom to take the afikomen piece and put it on their shoulder as they take it away from the table. As remember that people carried all those matzahs on their shoulders out of the land of Egypt. Halacha Zayin, Magid. Magid is the recitation of the Haggadah itself. Then here, we're actually going to lift the Seder plate. And every single person in the household lifts a plate. Sometimes if one's wife is in Ida and there's a forced separation because of that, and she would be embarrassed, okay, or people would make fun. So it's important it's a better practice that one's wife not pick up the plate at all. And many great rabbis follow this custom. And I should also note that in some places the custom is only to have the person leading the Seder lift the plate. He doesn't mention that. And when you lift it up, you recite the paragraph Halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. And so because you have the broken piece there on the plate. A couple of other things that we often do, as the Mishnah Berurah brings down, is you should also remove the matzah from the table and to put them at the edge of the table like it's already finished eating. Some people take the Seder plate off the table too. Okay, and we said earlier that the Chayei does not take the Seder plate off. So that's another possibility in this case. So whatever your custom is will be valid in this case. At this point, you're going to fill up your second cup, and you're going to allow the children to ask questions via the paragraphs of Ma Nishtana. How are these nights different? If there's no child there, then any other child will do, or his friend, or even his own wife. And once that's completed, you recite the paragraph of Avadim Hayinu. And part of the response to the questions is to say, we were once slaves. The best practice is like many of the most impressive people do for the Seder is to explain the Haggadah in, as he says here, Lashon Ashkenazi, which would be, had them would have been Yiddish. He says, or in any other language they understand. Because everyone at the table, women and so on and so forth, are all required to take part of this mitzvah, and the recitation of the Haggadah is important for them to hear. And so if you have people serving, as we mentioned earlier, then they should come and sit by the table during the recitation of the Haggadah and come and listen to the whole thing. If the person who's serving needs to step out, or the woman of the house needs to step out to prepare something in the kitchen to cook, nonetheless, they should still be at the table to hear Kiddush, and they should definitely be there to hear Rabban Gamliel, because if you don't hear those things, you don't fulfill your obligation. And so therefore, she should return and listen until the end of the drinking of the second cup. Because as we said, one who does not make mention of these three things does not fulfill the obligation. Our custom is that we also recite the 10 plagues, and those are recited aloud. We want everybody to hear them. And the reason why we do that is in order to inform the people at the table how many amazing things were done by Hashem, or the Holy One, blessed be He, is what he writes here, for the sake of Israel. When we get to the part of Rabban Gamliel that says matzah zu, this matzah, you should make sure to lift the matzah and to show it to everybody there. Mr. Brewer would actually say that you take the broken piece of matzah. Some people kiss the matzah in order to show how beloved the mitzvah is in their hands. My personal experience has been people just point to it, don't necessarily pick it up, but you can do either one. You can point and you can lift. If there's only one Seder plate at the table, then the head of the household, in my opinion, should lift the matzah, and then everyone else should point to it. And so too for the maror, lift up the maror to show everybody, and they should point to it. But when you say, when you make mention of Pesach, and you say Pesach, right, we say Pesach Chayei Avosenu. We say that there was once one, but there's nothing here on the table that represents it. We don't do any of that. We don't want people to think that there is an actual offering here. After this, we come to the paragraph of Lefichach that we just mentioned, and at that point, we have covered up all the matzahs, everything's put down, and you lift the cup, and you finish it with the words Ga'al Yisrael. And at that point, you've covered all of the bread that's on the table, and you drink the second cup. And there's already a common custom that you make a bracha on every single cup, and such is our custom. However, bracha achrona you don't say until the fourth cup. And once you've done with this, you're done with the majority of the first half of the Seder. So now we're at halacha 8 over here. Rachsa, washing your hands to get ready to do all the eating part of the Seder. So at this point, you wash your hands just like you would for any hand washing and say the bracha of al netilas yadayim. So the Mishnah Berurah points out that if you wash your hands correctly at Karpas, technically you're not obligated to go and wash them again. However, he says that the best thing you should do is to ruin your hands by either touching a scroll like Megillas Esther if you have it around your house, or to put your hands inside of your shirt and touch your body and then just rub them off on something else to clean them so that way you can recite holy words afterwards. And then you would be obligated to wash your hands and recite the blessing for netilas yadayim for the bread, which in this case will be the matzah. Speaking of the matzah, we're in halacha 9 now, which is motzi matzah. Since there's a requirement on all the holidays to have lechem mishnah, in remembrance of the man that fell, and we always get a double amount before Shabbos and before the holidays. However, the blessing of Allah chilas matzah, the mitzvah itself of eating matzah, is really for the broken piece, because it's referred to as lechem oni, the poor man's bread. And just like a poor person, they only have pieces of bread sometimes. So therefore, what we do is we take that broken piece and put it between the two solid pieces, and then take all three of them in your hand, and you say hamotzi and alachilas matzah on them. Okay, and then you put down the third matzah and break from the top and the middle one, giving each person a kazayas, and leaning to eat 2 kazesim together. Now the Mishnah Berurah over here says that you should actually put down the third matzah before you do this, and that's the common custom, and you should say that in your Haggadah as well. In terms of the size of the kazayas, if you have there are different opinions of it. Some people require you to have about 2/3 of a matzah, a machine matzah, and about half of a hand matzah to fulfill this obligation. So those are the best ways to fulfill this obligation, especially on the first night. And you're going to eat that way. You can eat 2 kazesim, one from the top, one from the bottom. If you cannot eat both of them together, then you shall eat the hamotzi one first, and then eat from the broken piece second. It's better that you should break them both down and eat both zesim, both big pieces at the same time. Okay, and try to either break them up or try to chew on it to get them all in your mouth at the same time, and then swallow it. If it's difficult for you to swallow at that point, then you should eat it a little bit and swallow a little bit, but you shouldn't take longer than what's known as kadei achilas pras, the amount of time one would normally take to eat a piece of bread, from when you start eating it until you actually eat the whole kazayas. The Mishnah Berurah holds here that you don't have to swallow them all at the same time. The point is to actually get them in your mouth at the same time. So that way you taste the 2 kazesim. So that's really the goal, is to shove it in your mouth. That's the main thing. That's part of the fun of the Seder. Okay, halacha yud is maror. After this, we mentioned previously that you should soften up the charoses. So you're going to take and add some of the wine or the vinegar that you would use as your liquid component for it. You want it to be a good dip, but his custom was to do this at the time of the Seder. You should take your kazayas of maror, which is in discussing what's the size of that. So we've talked about getting your maror into a 1 fluid ounce cup. So if you're using horseradish, you can grind it up into that and not leave any airspace in between. And if you're using romaine, you can kind of eyeball what it would take to shove it all into a 1 ounce shot glass, or basically take about 2 leaves with stalks on it, and fold that up, and you should be able to get a kazayas out of that. If you're not sure, add another little stalk in there and get 3 stalks. And then you're going to take those pieces, and especially if you're going to be using horseradish, you shouldn't just take a chunk. You should actually grate it ahead of time, so that the flavor, the sharpness of it is not so dangerous, but you don't want to lose all the flavor. You then take it and dip it in the charoses, and you shake the charoses off, because if you taste the charoses, you won't taste the maror. You then say the blessing al achilas maror, and you should chew the maror, because you want to actually taste the bitter flavor of it. However, if you swallow the maror and don't chew it, you have to do it again. With matzah, this is not the case. Even if you didn't chew it, you fulfilled the obligation. And maror, you shouldn't let it soak in a liquid overnight. The Mishnah Berurah adds over here, let's see, what does he add over here? Okay, we discussed these actually last time. We discussed these in a longish here with the laws of the Seder, where you need to make sure you don't have this stuff on top of it. And I'm not going to slow this down by going back and looking up the citations over here. Okay, korech. So after you have eaten the kazayas of the matzah, you should take now some of the third matzah, the third whole matzah, because you're going to fulfill another mitzvah with it. If you don't have enough matzah and need this one for tomorrow, then you can fulfill the mitzvah of korech with the top matzah or the middle matzah. And you're going to take another kazayas of maror, and you're going to wrap it into the matzah. We call it a sandwich. The appropriate thing to do is to take the maror and dip it in the charoses. And you're going to have to shake this off as well. You should then eat the two zaysim at the same time, if you can, and get them all in your mouth and chew it. Okay, but you don't have to swallow them all at the same time. You have to just get it in your mouth all at the same time. You should not be chit-chatting while you're doing these things, unless you do something that is pertinent to getting the food to your mouth during this sandwich. Because the bracha of achilas matzah and the bracha of achilas maror should apply to these things as well. Nonetheless, if you do say something, you don't have to repeat the bracha. Okay. Halacha Yud Beis, Shulchan Orech, the festive meal. This is when you eat the festive meal. You should not eat anything roasted on both of these Seder nights. Even something cooked and then roasted and then roasted in a pot is also inappropriate. And that rule goes the same with chicken, if it's not for a sick person. One is allowed to roast eggs. There are some places where the custom is to eat eggs on both nights, and one who is lenient and decides not to eat, that's good too, because some people just eat so many eggs and they don't leave room for the afikomen, so that's not appropriate. And he says that he skips the egg eating himself, but the common custom is many people eat the egg. And I've actually seen two customs with this. They either eat a hard-boiled egg, or they chop it up and mix it to make like a little soup or an egg salad with the salt water. Okay, the point is you can eat the egg as long as you leave room for the afikomen at the end. Halacha Yud Gimel, Safon. This is where we finish the meal and we eat the afikomen. And this is the one that we put away earlier during Yachatz. And the name of it is the afikomen, which means the dessert. The proper way to eat it is to eat 2 zaysim from it. Okay, so again, you're going to want to eat about half machine matzah or 2/3 of a regular matzah. Okay, one zayas is a remembrance of eating the korban pesach, and the other zayas is to remind yourself of the consumption of the chagiga. Nonetheless, you should not eat less than a kazayas, and you should eat that while leaning. So if you can only eat 1/3 of a machine matzah or 1/4 of a hand matzah, those would be acceptable options as well if it was too difficult for you. And you should definitely eat it before midnight. And one should make sure that Hallel is completed before midnight as well. And after the afikomen, you should eat nothing else and drink nothing else except for the cups of wine. The Mishpur says that water would be acceptable. Barech is the grace after meals, the Birchas Hamazon. So this is where you pour yourself that third cup. You wash your hands with mayim achronim, which is a common custom. But some people don't wash mayim achronim. That is a note that I'm adding over here. But in the Chayei, he says you should wash mayim achronim. You should wash your hands after the meal, which means to go ahead and just wash one time on each hand from a utensil, just like you would wash your hands for before the meal. But there it's before the meal it's with 2, and after the meal it's with 1. Say Birchas Hamazon. So then you bench. And you should try to find 2 other adult males, and have a zimun. And it's the custom that the head of the household themselves recite the benching. And after Birchas Hamazon, you drink the third cup leaning to your left, and you say the blessing beforehand, Borei Pirigafen. You should drink nothing between the third cup and the fourth cup. Nonetheless, if the cup is really big, and at the time of when he drank it and had in mind when he said the bracha, then he could drink from it numerous times because it's considered all one big drink. And a couple of notes here about Mishnah Berurah. The other thing to remember is also not to drink between the first couple of cups so you don't become drunk. So that's a different thing to drink just regular drinks. And something that is not an alcoholic beverage, one would be permitted to drink in this case, as long as you have in mind to drink. And nonetheless, if it's really very large, you shouldn't drink the whole thing in order that you don't become drunk from the third cup. Okay, halacha 15. Hallel. After benching, the important thing to do now is to open up the door, and the reason why we do that is to remind us that tonight is a guarded night, Leil Shimurim. And with our belief and faith in Hashem that the Messiah will come, and he will pour out his wrath upon the non-Jewish world who have persecuted us and offset us with anti-Semitism. We then recite the paragraph of Shvoch Chamascha, please pour out your wrath upon those who have sought our ill. After we do that, we close the door and pour ourselves the fourth cup. And we begin with the rest of Hallel, which starts with the Lo Lanu, and we complete it. And then after we complete it, we recite the paragraph that starts with the Hallelujah, but we don't recite the blessing at the end. And after that, we recite what's known as the Hallel HaGadol, which is a number of paragraphs that ends with Ki Le'olam Chasto, and there's 26 lines in there altogether. Following that, we recite Nishmas and Yishtabach, like you would at the conclusion of Psukei Zimra in the morning. And then you finish off Yishtabach with the blessing at the end, Chayei Ha'olamim. And this is according to Nusach Ashkenaz. If you are Sephardi, you should follow the Sephardic custom for these recitations. There are some other customs. Some people don't recite Yahalucha, and or they recite Yahalucha with the bracha, but then you wouldn't say the bracha at the end of Yishtabach. My personal custom is not like the Chayei Adam. I personally skip all the Yahalucha paragraphs in there and only say the blessing at the end of Yishtabach. And even in Avel, during Shiva, recites Hallel at this point. And once you finish this blessing, you're going to make the Borei Pirigafen and drink the fourth cup while leaning to your left. And if you want, you can recite some more psalms of praise at that time, known as piyutim, which are found in the Haggadah. After you drink the fourth cup, you recite a blessing for after that, especially if you drank a full revius in one shot. And that's the only way you're going to recite a bracha achrona. After these 4 cups, you do not have permission to drink anymore, except for water or certain types of fruit juices are permitted if you really need to drink. And especially on the second night, it would be permitted. But for everything else, the second night is like the first night. At this point, we come to Nirtza. A person is obligated to recite the Exodus from Egypt the entire night long until they become grabbed with sleep. Therefore, there are those who recite the entire book of Shir HaShirim, because the book of Shir HaShirim is some people say that it is a story that reflects the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people during the Exodus. However, no one recites anything while sitting on their bed except for the Shema at the end of the night. And at the end of the night, you should still, if you feel you're tired, you should still go ahead and make time to recite the blessing Hama Pil Sheina. And let's see, we were going to hold it here. This is an abbreviated version of the laws of the Seder.